Good morning and welcome back to our Facebook Live feed. My name's Wendy Johnstone and I'm just one of the many support staffs at Family Caregivers of BC, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be here this morning. So what I'd like to talk about today, or what we'd like to talk about today, is self-care strategies. Before we get into that, I want to just mention that as we continue to navigate this ever-changing landscape with an attempt to define this new normal, the team at Family Caregivers of BC, we're constantly looking for ways that we can help provide support and resources to family caregivers and the people they're caring for. So what we do now, we all need support in some form or another, and we're increasing our use of social media through our online platforms. So the conversation on Facebook Live is to foster connection and insight and education for caregivers during this time. We have our education lead on the line. Kate, nice to see you. And one of the things that we're trying to also do is create this connection through physical distancing and change. So this is a shared experience for everyone. And most of us are experiencing some form of change in our lives, or stress or anxiety. And so we are constantly learning from you, our users, and the information we're receiving to provide support and compassion and care. So thank you for being here with us today. So before we begin today's topic, we just want to make sure you know how to connect with us and how we can support you. So first off, if you're an active user on Facebook, you can send us your questions, ideas, and concerns through Messenger, and we'll be sure to monitor the inbox on a regular basis to help direct you and support you. During the actual live sessions, as I'm learning, it's very difficult to respond to people's questions and comments, and so we don't often maybe have time to get into a real dialogue. But if you are faced with a very complex caregiving situation, or if you have a very specific question, please reach out to us by phone or by email and or by messenger, and we'll be happy to answer your questions and provide support or help direct you in to the right resource and tool. So at Family Caregivers of BC, we really take our confidentiality and privacy very seriously. So this live session, of course, is open to anyone that uses Facebook. And so we aren't able to take any steps to protect your privacy or the content you share. So we just want to make sure that people are aware also that the experiences and the information expressed are meant to speak to caregivers on a general level, and they may not reflect your own personal experience. Caregiving is a very personal and unique experience to all of us. Please check our website regularly, sign up for our newsletter and social media feeds, as we're trying to provide a lot of regular updates and recommendations through ongoing literature and ongoing research and ongoing resources that are being passed to us at Family Caregivers of BC. So today we're going to talk about self-care. And I thought it was really fitting to start this conversation to hear a quote from a caregiver themselves. And I'm going to read off a couple of scripts here just so that I don't muck anything up, and I'll probably, unfortunately, mispronounce her name, but I hope I don't do that. We're just getting ready to launch a podcast, and it's called Caregivers Out Loud. And Marlene Schlotterbeck is featured on one of these podcasts, and she reminds us of the importance of self-care. And what she says is, know the importance of yourself. Know that the healthier you are mentally and physically, the better you'll be able to care for someone else. She also talks about that taking baby steps at the beginning will go a long way. And I think we could take it one step further to say taking baby steps wherever we're at is going to help us in the here and the now and in the future. So one thing I wanted to start off with today is this idea that self-care isn't an indulgence. It's actually more of a practice. It's an awareness, which we'll get to. So I think sometimes the way that self-care is portrayed is a bit backwards. So while the intent to bring awareness to the idea of self-care is important, perhaps how we're doing it generally seems a bit flawed sometimes. So, and it can be confusing. It's not necessarily an indulgent activity that we do occasionally to bring us back into balance, or one that we need to do in order to be able to continue juggling all the other components we have in our lives. I think this idea that it's self-indulgent is in fact can confuse us in terms of how we look at self-care. And so sometimes self-care is really these small steps that we take either every day or every other day, or we're very mindful of what helps keep us present in that moment, or what's going to help us on this particular day or in this particular moment. So why is it that self-care is so hard? We often speak to caregivers, even as human beings, as a human being, even my own self-care. Why is it so hard? I think, and what we're reading and what we're understanding is that part of the reason why self-care is so tough is that it requires us to be tough-minded. It requires us to make decisions that are good for us, but don't always, that aren't always easy. So it requires us to also be very aware of where we're at in this moment, and how caregiving makes us feel, or how a particular situation makes us feel. And it also really requires that we are really focused on holding space and respect for ourselves and the person we're caring for. We have Lisa from Caregivers Alberta. Hello, welcome. So great to see you online this morning. So one of the examples that that we were reading about self-care is this idea that, and I'm using this because I'm finding even myself through this whole process of being isolated at home, in the evenings, we like to sometimes enjoy a show on Netflix. And so self-care sometimes is knowing, well, going out for a walk is equally important to us. And so it's making that choice of only watching one episode instead of binging 3 and going for that walk as well. It's hard. They're not easy decisions, especially when we're faced with adversity and challenge, and maybe the easy decision would be to sit. And on some days, that is the right choice. So it's also figuring out in the here and now, where are we feeling and what's going to give us the most support today in this moment. So I think at the root of self-care, and we talk a lot about this, and a lot of the staff at Family Caregivers of BC, we talk about this idea that self-care is self-awareness. So how we look after ourselves is deeply personal and unique for us. So what I do for myself is going to be very different from someone else. And I think that's really important to acknowledge that and to not compare ourselves to what other people are doing. The one common thread that self-care has is it's this awareness of ourselves. So it's bringing insight or bringing more understanding about how we're feeling and seeing, and being able to hear ourselves and see ourselves in our situation. It also requires us to know what brings us comfort, or what, as I like to call them, what are our non-negotiables that help us feel grounded in the moment, in the day, in the month. And before we can actually take action, we need to have self-awareness. And so sometimes that's often why caregivers feel really challenged, is they know they need to do things, but they don't know what they are. And perhaps just not having the time, or feeling that they have the time, to bring awareness to where they're at. We have lots of resources around mindfulness and how to take very small steps on just bringing awareness to your current situation. So we might ask ourselves, for example, what will support me in this moment? It might be a long walk, or it might be rest. It could be calling a friend and asking for support, or just talking about something other than caregiving. Or it could be saying no to a social event, even though maybe it's been in the calendar for weeks. But on that morning or that night before, going to it will perhaps be more draining than it will be more energizing. So again, it is those being tough-minded about some of those decisions, or trying to put our self-care practices first. So actively engaging in self-care practices, they can help meet your own needs. And the better that we're feeling about ourselves, and the better we're feeling more grounded or recharged, depending on the type of personality we have or the type of situation we have, it really does help us care for others. It's not a selfish act at all. So self-care is also about being nice to ourselves, and we can be pretty hard on ourselves sometimes. if you haven't heard of Dr. Kristen Neff, she's a go-to for most of us at Family Caregivers of BC, or for all of us at Family Caregivers of BC. And, self-compassion is crucial for family caregivers, because we're all going to make mistakes in our role. We know that. We can't be perfect. We're going to make mistakes. And so when those mistakes happen, it's this ability to forgive ourselves for not being perfect. And because it also allows us to acknowledge and bring comfort to ourselves that caregiving is a difficult time. It's very complicated. How could we possibly know what to do all the time? And so treating ourselves the way we would treat a friend if they called us and said, oh my gosh, I made a terrible mistake today. And our response would be one of saying, gosh, that sounds so hard right now. I mean, it's only natural that you're feeling this way. Using those words with ourselves is really important during our caregiving experience, especially, on those days where things aren't going the way we had hoped or thought they could or should, if we tend to get into those should statements. The other thing we wanted to talk a bit about today, and when you tune in next week to our podcast, you'll have the wonderful opportunity to listen to Joni McDonald, and she's a great resource and incredibly passionate and knowledgeable around self-care. And what she'll likely reference regularly, if you ever speak to Jodi, is this idea that self-care doesn't mean self-improvement. And I think it's a real powerful statement in the sense that activities of self-care are really beneficial and they have a positive impact on our health, but they're there to meet our own needs, whatever that looks like. It doesn't mean that we have to improve ourselves as a human being. It just means that we want to look after ourselves where we're at. We have a kind of a joke in our, not a joke, but a saying in our family where we say, we're doing the best we can with the resources we have, or we're doing the best we can, in the situation that we're faced with right now. It doesn't mean that we're not going to learn from that or we're not going to reflect, but it is about our own self-care and our own abilities. The other thing is that we want, self-care is really about feeling like we are giving ourselves more support, that we can feel grounded, that we're being better cared for. And again, it doesn't mean that it has to be self-improvement. So some of the things we like to try and ask with family caregivers on the call line or during a coaching call or in our caregiver support groups is asking ourselves, what do I need today in this moment? And also to come back to the idea as, what is that one non-negotiable for me today, this week? This idea that, on my own personal example, even though I'm currently not caregiving, there are other things in my life that, that I'm juggling. And so my non-negotiable right now, especially during this time, is 8 hours of sleep. If I don't get enough sleep, I can't bring my best self forward. It's not always a guarantee, but that's kind of my one non-negotiable. And so that means for me that, I need to be in bed by a certain time so that I have a natural wake-up time. And so I need to make sure that I'm counting backwards for that. For others, it might be something very different. For others, it just simply, might be having 5 or 10 minutes to have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea to themselves without any distractions and just peace and quiet. I was speaking to a family caregiver just yesterday, and for her, she said, for me, it's really about, when I get up, I really like to read the newspaper. I can't read it front to back, but I have my cup of tea and I have 10 minutes just to read the paper, or 15 minutes, and I go to my go-to sections that I like the most first, and it really helps ground me and prepare me for my day and makes me feel like a normal human being before I need to start caring for my spouse. I think the other thing that's really important, especially now, even more so now, in these strange times around physical distancing, is staying connected. And that looks very different at different times. But in the here and now, it is about finding ways to stay connected. So what we do know is that connecting with others, whether it's other caregivers or other individuals in our circles of support, which is something else that we speak about at Family Caregivers of BC, and we have some really great resources and webinars on that, is that part of self-care is also being able to share with others and how we're feeling and how we're doing. And so one of the things that we talk about in the idea of circles of support is knowing who's in that circle of support. And so those are people that we can rely on regularly for support and care and positivity, empathy, and that probably shouldn't be left for chance. So thinking ahead a bit and understanding who's in my circle, especially if we know that typically during a caregiver journey things will get harder, knowing that you have that support to lean on is really important. And again, there's more resources at Family Caregivers in BC that can help go into more detail and actually how to do that and how to think through that process. The last thing that we want to speak to, or we want to share, or provide support on, is this idea of asking for and accepting help. And we find in our conversations with so many caregivers that this is so hard. And we think part of it is that there's this real value, we place a value on independence, and or maybe not wanting to put out other people or not wanting to be a burden on others. But what caregivers tell us, and what caregivers will support each other in caregiver support sessions and on our support line, is that caregiving is not something that can be accomplished alone, at least for not very long. So a few ideas or a few things that we provide support on is this idea of identifying your needs. And this is also part of that self-care process that we talked to around bringing awareness. So try to be as specific as possible, and that's often helpful. Determining who you can ask, because that's also a big part of it too. We want to make sure that the people we ask are the right people to ask. We want to be able to explore how we ask for help and how we receive support. What we do know is that when people offer support, following up on that offer can be one way to really help build connections with others, receive support, but also provide opportunities for others who want to care for us but who don't know how, to be as direct as possible with them, to appreciate and validate. Maybe it's not exactly what we wanted, but the fact that someone is able to support us, accepting and acknowledging and appreciating is really important. And keep asking. It's a struggle. I think for most human beings, it's a struggle to ask for help. But it is this idea that if we do keep asking it, sometimes it does get a little easier. The last thing I want to touch on before we finish up for the day is where to find more support and resources. I see there's been lots of comments around where to find resources. First off, call our support line. That's what we're here for. All the information is on our Facebook site and on our website on how to reach us. So we're available Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4 p.m. And we can support you based on your unique needs. And it can help we can help you bring awareness just by connecting with you and learning more about your story and hearing more about your story. And we can provide some suggestions on how to help prioritize. We can also refer you into other resources and programs, whether it's our one-to-one support through caregiver coaching, whether it's going to be our Victoria-based support group that's going to be a teleconference. There could be some really great tips and strategies on our website that we're going to direct you to. And so the best way to do that is to reach out to us. Tune into our podcast next week. Really excited. We're really excited to be launching this on April the 14th. You can find all the information I see in the comments already and also online. And sign up for our e-news if you haven't already. We've got some great resources in that e-news, and it comes out regularly, but not too regularly. And finally, what we hope is that at the end of today that you'll join me in asking yourself, what's one thing, big or small, that you think you can do today or this week to help support yourself in today's time and in the future. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.